GarageBand is the superior episode. You're just here for my thoughts on the Casagrandes Season 3 finale, do you? When I first heard about movers and fakers, I honestly thought that this was the episode where Ryan is moving back to Royal Woods, where she used to live. But apparently, after thinking about it for a while, I honestly thought that finale was way too over the top to be considered as a finale. And what I mean is that for the only way for Ryan to move back into Royal Woods is that she needs to adjust her old life when it came to the episodes of Season 3 where she appeared, and of course before the episode where she moved to Great Lake City. But you know what? Bobby also stayed at Royal Woods, and for me personally, if he went back to Royal Woods, I'm pretty sure that Lori is going to have a difficult time hanging out with her boyfriend in the predicament that she thought was never going to happen. And yet at the same time, I also thought that for how that this episode is executed, literally nothing changes. Seriously, the idea of Bobby moving into his own apartment doesn't change the fact that he's still coming back to his family when it comes to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that is the reason onto why I didn't like this finale. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In GarageBand, Lori cannot stand her siblings constantly bothering her to the point that she can't be able to have any time for herself. So she decides to move into the garage, since that she's getting close to becoming an adult herself. In Movers and Fakers, Bobby did the same thing, except that he didn't tell his siblings or relatives that he's moving out. And the majority of the episode is mostly Bobby going back to his apartment by getting his things while trying to adjust his life alone. This just sums up that Bobby is uncooperative when it comes to handling a life of his own. And the sad thing about all of this is that regardless if GarageBand aired in 2017, while Movers and Fakers aired just last year at the end of September, it just gave me the impression that Lori is a better person than Bobby because she is a lot more cooperative when it comes to adjusting her life since that she moved out during the premiere of Season 5, while Bobby, on the other hand, can't be able to move on with his life without Lori. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, the episodes I've seen involving Bobby, including the Season 4 episodes from the Loud House, showcase that Bobby is cooperative when it comes to handling a life, not to mention coming up with ideas for himself. And for me personally, the fact that he's being portrayed in this scenario by going back to his parents' apartment, by getting the things that he needs, including getting food from Rosa without her knowing, just goes to show that he is gonna be a really poor man if he ever got dumped, to the point that being single is gonna be the worst thing that ever happened in his life. That may be way too harsh for people who ship Bobby and Lori together, but to be honest with you, the fact that we've seen this character from the very beginning, and this is how he's portrayed, goes to show that if he gets dumped, then he can't be able to succeed in life. He will probably be in the Mercado for the rest of his life while staying with his parents. Granted, I can understand that there could be upsides when it comes to a life like that, but at the same time, with the amount of times I've seen Bobby throughout this show, even one of the most stupidest moments, at least he had some kind of intelligence and actually thought about himself and tried to make a situation better. Mainly the fact that he tried to make the Mikado successful against a supermarket across town. So it just doesn't make any sense that he can't be able to handle himself in life. When it came to Loi's predicament in her episode, she was getting close to becoming an adult herself, and the thing is, her profession in golf goes to show that she can be able to carry herself in life without anyone helping her out. And for me personally, regardless if her moving out in season 5 was rushed, it didn't change the fact that this episode really showcased that she was way too early to start a life by herself by moving into a garage without any interruptions. At times, this episode is just hammering in that Lori just isn't ready to have a place for herself, along with the fact that she misses her siblings. But at the same time, it's the development that she's getting in season 2. And for me personally, the fact that this is well around the time where people just cannot stand Lori for how unlikable she is. She became likable in this episode, and while yes, there are other episodes that are better than this episode, it didn't change the fact that she was improving. Relating to Lori's situation in this episode sums up that Lincoln isn't the only sibling helping out everyone else's problems. Lori is willing to help since that she knows much better compared to the other stuff that she isn't familiar with, mainly what Lincoln does and what he does best. Granted, it is weird to think that Lincoln helps out Lori from time to time, and there were times where Lori helps out Lincoln, but in this episode, while Lincoln is dealing with struggles by helping out Luann and Luna, it shows the reasonable problematic of the Lau house itself. The Lau family taking itself seriously when it comes to one sibling not being there for them, all the while that Lincoln, who isn't familiar with most of the stuff that Luann and Luna are dealing with, goes to show that this is the type of development that Lincoln should have gotten involved in the family if he is not familiar with how girls react. I mean, I know that topic can be flip-floppy when it comes to Lincoln knowing what girls feel like when it comes to him living with 10 siblings, but with examples like this, I honestly felt like that Lori might be the right person to handle a situation like this, unlike Lincoln. But considering that the Casagrandes episode has none of those elements, which I would have given the episode credit for not being too similar to the Loud House episode, it doesn't change the fact that Bobby's character just isn't the right character for an episode where he moves out, regardless if he's becoming an adult like Lori. The reason why he got a free apartment is because Jean-Philippe got a job in Paris, which means that he give an apartment to Bobby in order to make things much more simpler for Bobby to handle. But considering that Hector, Rosa, and Maria, who is the mother of Bobby, is gonna come over to do a session, this leads to a problem where Bobby needs to be in the disguise as Jean-Philippe in order to fool his family. And while being in disguise, he plays multiple videos on how to make food, all the while he accidentally pressed the wrong buttons on his phone, which led to him making mistakes of doing the wrong instructions on to make food, which led to Rosa putting the food inside the oven for 1,000 degrees. May I remind you that Rosa is a chef. So you mean to tell me that Rosa, who's a chef, is totally unaware that she was willing to burn the entire building down? This is the type of elements onto why I don't take this final episode seriously, especially since that Nick didn't advertise this as the finale of the Casagrandes. Believe me, I saw the commercials online and there was no mentions of this being the final episode. Here's the thing when it comes to the Loud siblings in GarageBand. At times, they'll may be mean-spirited and way more irritating, but considering that that's something that Lori just has to accept regardless if she cannot stand it in the beginning of the episode, it's honestly one of the reasons why I fell to a situation onto why she needed to move out. But in the Casagrandes episode, well, Bobby is just being bothered by some of his siblings and not every single one of them. Granted, to give this episode, to give the Loud Houses credit, they didn't do all of the siblings in order to annoy Lori, but when it came to the Casagrandes, when there was only a few siblings, especially that Ryan didn't mean to annoy Bobby completely, all I'm just gonna be saying is why can't you just text inside your bedroom? You're in the living room. No one is bothering you in your room, and I don't think that they will be willing to go into your room to annoy you. That's the thing. When Lori had issues with her siblings, it was in her and Lenny's room, but Bobby is doing all this in the living room. He should really expect most of the siblings to do all this crazy stuff. It's almost like if they include Carlota, Frida, or Carlos into the mix, it will probably be way too similar and they can't be able to come up with over-the-top craziness in order to drive Bobby to insanity to the point that he wants an apartment for himself. That's the thing, is the Movers and Fakers is just basically a toned down garage band episode, but not even a good episode at that. In fact, it just shows how lazy the finale of the Casagrandes is when you take into consideration that Bobby is willing to come back to his parents or anyone for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like I said earlier. When he told the truth to Maria and Rosa, it doesn't work because knowing full well that the apartment that he's in isn't anything special compared to the old apartment that he used to live in with his family, it just goes to show that the only thing that he's good at is making a bed out of flour or finding anything in order to make his own apartment suitable. That's honestly the saddest thing about Bobby's character, is that if this is the best that he can do when it comes to handling an apartment by himself, then I don't even know what his life would be like once he marries Lori and makes babies with her. But I'm gonna be perfectly honest, this show, along with The Loud House, just shows that Lynn and Rita aren't really the best parents, and there are other parents that have different reasonings of taking care of the children, and it also goes to show every single parent in both shows are never the best, which goes to show that both shows don't take parents seriously anymore. Seriously. All I can think of from this image alone is how Mr. Fox managed to impregnate Mrs. Fox with 5 twins. It may be too much information, but at the same time, the logic of this show just doesn't make any sense, knowing full well that there's another family who impregnate 5 twins, while the Loud family had 2 twins. I guess the only thing that's worth discussing about GarageBand is Lori's attempts of getting back into the house. Her attempts were backfired due to her siblings helping her out, and for me personally, it's actually a lot more clever to have Lori dealing with handicap situations involving his siblings. Well, in the beginning of the episode, they were annoying her, but towards the middle of this episode and towards the end, they were doing the opposite, mainly helping her out. And the reason that Lori got back into the house is that after making a deal with Mr. Grouse just completely spilled the beans in front of Lori's siblings. This is Mr. Grouse we're talking about. Like, after watching the season 5 episode, well, he's dealing with the same situation that Lori felt in this episode. I'm starting to understand onto why people just can't be able to move on in order to have a different life with silence around them. At this point, I'm starting to convince that the loudness in this show, and maybe the Casagrandes, is probably the reason onto why nothing changes completely, except with the negative aspects involving that. But then again, I'm the same person who discussed Lincoln Loud's character for nearly 7 hours in August of last year, so I'm starting to convince that mainly the lives of others are much more different compared to Lincoln Loud. As for the ending of the Casagrandes spinoff, apparently Bobby moving out was even more pointless because Rosa set up security cams all over the apartment, including Bobby's. You know, there was this DeviantArt post that Ryan figured out the security cams that Rosa set up, which led to Rosa dealing with a downward spiral that, after being trusted so many times, apparently this is the straw that broke the camel's back, mainly involving her family and everyone around her. But if you ask me, I think that the original plans is that there was going to be a 4th season involving the Casagrandes where someone of Rosa's family might figure out her security system, but I don't even think that this would lead to her dealing with depression with so many of her family and friends completely abandoning her. At this point, negativity just doesn't really feel deserved for Rosa, regardless if she is spying on her family. If anything, this ending really sums up that there was originally going to be a planned for future episodes for a 4th season, but considering that the cancellation began back in February of this year, I'm going to assume that the production of this episode happened in February and probably finished at February, if that makes sense. I think I've addressed my points that GarageBand is the superior episode over Movers and Fakers. I guess the only good scene that I enjoyed in the Casagrandes episode was the super chunkler in Bobby's imagination, where he tells Rosa and Maria that he's moving out. That is really hilarious and probably one of the last funniest jokes in the Casagrandes. If anything, without this joke, I would probably say that this episode would have been a lot more worse. But the thing is, this episode wasn't terrible. It's most likely the fact that it's just a rehash, Bobby's character not being taken seriously even if it's a major problem, and there was literally nothing harmful in this episode, so you can instantly watch through this without any problem, unless if you're against the idea that this is a rehash of GarageBand. But at the same time, it's also sad that this ended up being the final episode of the Casagrandes. And since I'm planning to do a top 5 worst Casagrandes episode list when it comes to Cartoon Crisis 3 material, this would still be on the dishonorable mentions, but this would definitely be better than the other dishonorable mentions and the list itself. But still, GarageBand is miles better than Movers and Fakers, which is why I'm giving GarageBand a 7.5 out of 10, while Movers and Fakers gets a 4.25 out of 10.